In the late 1700s, canal mania had gripped Britain, and it must have been a fascinating era to be around in. Engineers of their time trying to grapple with the long philosophised problems of the era. Notwithstanding high infant mortality rate, lack of medicine, and of course pretty horrendous living conditions. But all that aside, never before had man attempted to traverse the landscape in such a bold way. The desire to move heavy goods such as coal across the land without using rutted trackways was very much topic of the day. And of course, the desire to move up and down the land on water without wasting that water itself was very much on the agenda. And so to southwest England, where one of the biggest issues of the day was getting from Bristol to the south coast, without going all the way around Land's End and Cornwall, of course, the dangerous peninsula. You join us on the Grand Western Canal, and we're in search of a curious canal invention that had the potential to change the way canals traverse the landscape forever. So with the Grand Western Canal having this huge ambition, and excuse the graphic here, with that they built the first 9-mile section really quickly. The Tiverton to Loudswell was done in 4 years, albeit with no locks, lifts or inclines required. That was complete by 1814. So the Tiverton to Loudswell section was complete at the 90-metre contour. That's important to remember because the next section was getting down to Taunton at a 15-metre contour level. And that was obviously such a big problem that it took another 15 years for them to even get started on that. So much so they employed a local engineer called John Green. He'd worked on the Bude Canal, he'd worked under John Rennie, so he knew what he was doing. He even built an incline on that Bude Canal, so he knew how to deal with gradients. But for this canal, that was obviously a bigger task, a bigger undertaking. So he proposed another incline and 7 of these. So these were boat lifts which used a philosophical principle from half a century ago by somebody called Anderson, not to be confused with Anderton. We'll come back to that principle shortly and the way in which James Green employed it on the canal. But despite this, there were issues, and from 1830 progress on this section of the canal was very slow. To the point in 1836 James Green was actually dismissed. It would take another 4 years for this canal to fully open thereafter. In 1838, 2 years after his dismissal, James Green wrote all about these lifts and how they worked and all their intricacies. And it gave the people of today, the archaeologists of today, a real insight into how they worked and the problems they encountered along the way. And that was 1838, but they carried on building the canal, despite what is just to my left here, which is the Bristol and Exeter Railway, opened in 1841. So this is Nynehead Lift, and it's one of the only surviving ones today. It's been dug out, it's been excavated and studied in many different ways. Now, it's not a new principle. James Green, even in 1830s, admitted that, oh, well, there you go, there's a train, look. James Green even admitted that it wasn't a new principle. He wrote about the Anderson principle. He acknowledged, we think he acknowledged fossils over in the Dorset and Somerset, which used a similar principle. So the idea being, in this section here would be the canal, the boat would go in, and just at the end where the arches are, they would go into a caisson. Now the caissons were held in 2 separate tubs, and they'd have a large wheel above them which would balance them. The idea being, if you had water in one, water in the other, it wouldn't take a great deal to just move them slightly and move them up and down. It's a very, very obvious principle, but there are a lot of teething problems with it, which we'll come to very shortly. So here we are at the very windy end of the Nynehead Aqueduct and following on for the Nynehead Lift just over there. Now, there was one mistake that James Green made. Now, based on the Anderson principle, it meant that one of the caissons had to have a slightly less amount of water in it, even a couple of inches, and that meant that when the other side went down, it would sink low enough that the boat could leave the caisson just by simply opening the lock below. He didn't do that, and he always had the same amount of water in each, and it led with all sorts of technical problems, so much so that on 3 of those lifts, including this one here, he had to build another lock just the other side of it. So if you look on the other end of this lock here, or this lift here, you'll see some additional locks. Now that, to my mind, almost defeats the object of having one of these beautiful lifts here in place. So let's take a look at the design of one of these lifts on the Grand Western Canal, designed by James Green. Here is a side-on profile view, the large wheels at the top with chains holding the caissons, which would in turn hold the boats inside them. You jack each caisson against each end, and you would open the guillotine type gates to keep them watertight, and off you'd venture down to the next section of the canal. So let's put our caissons on the location of this picture where they would have been raised and lowered, and flip this to a view from above. This is a design that James Green thought would work on 7 different locations, helping to get the boats down to Taunton, and more importantly, save a lot of water as the boats made that journey, a massive advantage over the more traditional locks. But because of this imbalance that we talked about, because he kept the water level the same, unlike Anderson had suggested, the locks had to be installed on at least 3 of these lifts to help with that journey down them. So there it is in all its glory, the beautiful James Green Nynehead Lift, and of course based on the principle of the Anderson lock, but with a slight change, hence the need for a couple of other locks in front of it, which probably defeated the object of the whole lift in the first place. Perhaps if it wasn't for the iron road behind it coming in 1841 here to Bristol and Exeter, perhaps if it wasn't for the design flaws from James Green, this canal would have become more of a prominent feature of Western England. So the wind and the rain has come in now, but why not? Because it's the start of June, so that completely makes sense for a British summertime. Crazy canal invention that James Green tried to undertake, its beautiful architecture, its beautiful structure that's still there today, but perhaps the worst thing was the execution.